Good day, everyone, and welcome to session 3.1, the dynamics of competition. And this is for BBMM506, strategic management. So what do we mean by competition? I think there's a good quote here from Roberto Guzzueta, who is the late chief executive of Coca-Cola Corporation some years back. He actually has passed away, but he was being interviewed by a reporter, and this interviewer asked him the question, do you sleep well at night with all the competition? Meaning, Coca-Cola, especially at that time, had a lot of competition from companies like Pepsi, so PepsiCo, and the Pepsi brand was very strong, and it was, of course, it was a head-to-head duel between Coke and Pepsi. And Gujweta replied, "No, I sleep like a baby." And people might think, "Oh, it means it doesn't seem to bother you." But actually, what he meant, the interviewer said, "Well, that's wonderful. It doesn't really bother you, does it?" And then he replied, "No, actually, I wake up every 2 hours and cry, just like a baby does." So I think what he's trying to say there is you really have to feel restless if you want to be competitive. And if you want your company to be truly ahead of its game, you need to be very cognizant of what competition is doing, and you need to strive to gain every advantage you can against competition. So here's a diagram which basically just illustrates, very simply, how in a competitive space, you might have 5 or so competitors competing over a limited market. So each one is trying to gain more market share at the expense of the other, especially when the industry isn't growing very, very fast. For example, the supermarket industry, the grocery industry here in Australia, probably the industry grows by about 2 or 3% every year. And you can argue that that's not very much. And so players like Coles and Woolworths, they really have to slug it out and try to gain market share from each other. So, Coles might come up with a promotion which tries to get the kids to come to the store. It might come up with a promotion that basically for every $30 that you spend in Coles, you get little toy miniature grocery items like these. They're very cute, and might attract a lot of kids to go. Little clips there. Again, this is might be attractive for some of its market, and therefore they come to the store and spend the 30 instead of going to Woolworths. But we know that Woolworths is not going to take that sitting down. They're going to have to react and do their own promotion. And, it might come up with a promotion using the Toy Story or the Disney characters. And, you buy $30 worth and then you get these toys. Again, this one is from Woolworths. So really, you can't expect competition to just stand still. When you do something new, they will respond and do something different to try to perhaps to stunt your growth with your promotion. So organizations need to have the ability to make sense of the chaos and spot opportunities ahead of their rivals. They have to have the ability to anticipate competitor actions and reactions. And they have to have the ability to use this intelligence and insight to influence customers and outperform competitors. An example of this, we're all familiar with the smartphone industry. And once upon a time, there was a brand named Nokia, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. Maybe one point in time when you were younger, you may have been carrying a Nokia phone like I did. And it was the #1 brand. It was far and away the market leader. And I think the problem there is they didn't really anticipate competitors' actions. And worse first of all, and when the competitor came up, which is Apple, basically, when Apple came up with a large format smartphone with a touch screen like such as this, then Nokia didn't respond quickly enough. They felt confident that their product was better than Apple, and they felt that they didn't need to sort of change the way their phones were, which was a big mistake. They didn't have that insight enough to influence customers, and customers saw how the advantages of having a large screen smartphone, and they flocked to Apple. And of course, that's history now. Nokia is really way down the list. For a time, they sold their business to Microsoft, but I think that didn't work out as well. And eventually, Nokia is back and doing smartphones, but this time they have adopted the large screen smartphone, just such as Apple, to try to compete in that. So if you make a mistake in the way you respond to competition, it could really spell the difference between success and failure. Okay, so Omei in 1982 identified 4 ways to gain that competitive advantage. And the first is you need to identify what the key success factors in the industry are, and basically focus your resources in doing well in these key success factors. Okay, so we talked about this earlier. What do you mean by key success factors? So in other words, these are the things that you need to do in your company to succeed in the industry. And these are common factors that most of your competitors would probably identify and would probably be doing something to try to improve their standing within those factors. So let's look at the video streaming industry. We talked about that a couple of days ago. Netflix is one of those. Netflix offers subscription services, but they have a lot of competitors, right? So what I'm going to ask you at this point, and let's have a little bit of a discussion, and we will pause this video if you're watching this after the fact. Then pause this video for a moment and ask yourself, what do you feel or what do you think are the key success factors in the video streaming industry? Trying to pause right now. Okay, so I hope you had a long thought about that, or maybe you had a discussion with your group partner to identify what these key success factors are in the video streaming industry. There could be several of these factors. One factor that I can think of right now would be how well are you at predicting the next technology wave. Netflix is really good at that, and they've been able to develop their technology in advance and use that success factor to be successful in the industry. So if you were not very good with technology, that doesn't matter what company you are within the video streaming industry, then likely you're not going to do very well. So that's an example of a key success factor for that industry. The second way to gain this competitive advantage would be to exploit your areas of superiority. So having a look at what your strengths are, in other words, and really capitalize on those strengths and use that to gain an advantage. An example of this might be Apple. And Apple has always been known to have a very good user interface. In other words, their gadgets and their software are easy to use. They're intuitive. So people, even if they've never seen it before, then it's quite easy for them to use it. And that's, again, a superiority of Apple. So they've used that all through these times. They've used that strength in computers, in laptops, and in smartphones, and say music players. And who knows what's up ahead, right? And a lot of people are saying that Apple is actually developing a next generation automobile, a car, in other words. So what kind of a car will that be? There's a lot of secrecy behind it, but we can expect that to be most likely to be a self-driving or semi-autonomous car. And it might be electric, we don't know for sure. But if they can use their advantages in user interface and use that as a competitive advantage, they can actually gain some headway in this industry, even if they're not currently operating in that industry. Okay, so one other way is to change the key success factors. This is the third way to gain competitive advantage. Change your key success factors and challenge these assumptions that people think about your industry. And again, I'll just go back to our old example a few days ago. Cirque du Soleil, which is a Canadian company, originally a Canadian company, and they reinvented the traditional circus. Most traditional circuses would often have animals in them, but they said, you know, let's challenge that assumption. Do we really need to have animals in our circus? And then they just focused on people. They focused on acrobats, and they focused on having very entertaining thematic shows with a lot of good storytelling. And they were extremely successful with that approach without the use of animals, which actually turned out to be an advantage because animals are high cost. You have to spend a lot of money to maintain animals, much more than people. Imagine an elephant. How much food does an elephant eat? So, you know, that's an example of really just changing the key success factors of that industry. The fourth is open a new market, you know, offer a new product, for example. You innovate and go into this market. So again, I'll just use Cirque du Soleil as an example. It's often been said that circuses cater or target children. But for Cirque du Soleil, they opened a new market and focused on adults instead of children. So that's a great approach. You know, offer something new, something that nobody's really focusing on, the adults. Circuses that focus on adults are, again, very unusual. And that's what they've come in and basically built their competitive advantage in that market. Okay, next slide, please. Hopefully it's gonna go. Here we go. Okay, so this figure just shows us a way to evaluate whether our industry is expected to have high returns or a good growth prospect. And you know, we can ask ourselves a series of questions, and really from there, we can determine whether we expect the industry to be a good industry with a lot of growth. So we started first with, is your company a well-known product or brand? And if the answer to that is yes, for example, Apple is a well-known brand, then you know, you go this direction in this decision tree. And so does it enjoy real or perceived differentiation? I would say Apple does have perceived differentiation. And in fact, of course, people will say it's real differentiation. In other words, it's not like any other product. It's got a different operating system. Unlike, say, a Samsung, which is what I have, Samsung uses the Android operating system, which is actually it's the same as, say, HTC brand or Xiaomi or you know, any other, lots of other brands use the Android operating system, and therefore that's not really different, right? But Apple uses its very exclusive operating system, which is a point of differentiation for them. So that answer for Apple would be yes, and therefore we follow that line there from yes. Next question we ask ourselves is, does it face imminent competition? So in other words, it may not have competition now, but maybe a year from now, will our competition come in and compete with us? And for Apple, in the smartphone industry, definitely the answer is yes. Samsung is a very strong competitor in many ways. It's captured a lot of market share from Apple. And in some categories, they're actually leading Apple. And so the answer to that would be yes. And therefore, you follow that line going down, and it tells us that unfortunately, the smartphone industry for Apple is unlikely to offer growth prospects. So, and that's very true now. The smartphone industry is reaching maturity, and a lot of people already have a lot of phones, and they're not really angling to buy new phones. So the growth is slowing down, and that's why Apple needs to find a new product in a new industry, perhaps, so that they can continue to grow. So, by the way, again, if you're from the start, if your answer to this question about if your product is well known, and if your answer is no, the next question really is it a high growth industry when price competition sets in? So another example of this would be the face masks industry. Now, we all know demand is very, very high. People need these face masks, especially here in Victoria, because it's mandated by the government as of now anyway. Now, high growth, definitely yes. Active price competition, not yet. But eventually, when again, there's going to be so much product in the market, it's, demand and supply will come in. And when demand starts to drop and you have a lot of supply, you will have price competition. And again, it's going to mean that the growth prospects will slow down. So this is a good decision tree diagram which you could use to try to predict again whether the industry will be growing, will be a good opportunity for your company or not. So successful competitors need to create three things. They need three things. The first is creating value. So, coming up with a product that's the same as everybody else's product, and you don't have an advantage, you're not offering it any lower, it's the same price, then people won't choose your product. You're not really creating value. If you're offering something different, or if your prices are lower, then that's when you are creating value. Second, create a competitive advantage in delivering that value. So how good are you at manufacturing your product and distributing your product? Can you create an advantage over your competitors? So an example might be your quality might be much higher. Your costs might be lower because you are very efficient, your factory in making these products. So that's an example of a competitive advantage. But thirdly, you need to operate your business effectively and efficiently. And I want to stress that efficiently. So in other words, your costs, as you operate, hopefully you can gain economies of scale and therefore be able to lower your costs. Maybe before I go into that, I'll discuss that aspect of economies of scale. Now, pause for a moment this video and ask yourself, what do you mean by economies of scale? And how does that work? Economies of scale happens when you sell more and more of a product, that you're able to bring down the cost. The discussion point at this point is, how does that happen? How is it that a company that makes more of a product can gain a cost advantage over a small company that manufactures less of the product? So take a moment and think about that, or discuss with your groups. Okay, so hopefully your discussion was very fruitful, and it centers around a realization that as you sell more of the product, then the company can actually, for example, demand more discounts from its suppliers, and promise its suppliers that they'll stick with their business and stick with buying from this company if they will give them lower discounts in their inputs. So, for example, Kohl's buying grocery products can demand a higher discount from, say, a food manufacturing company that supplies them with beef or with chicken, and they can pressure them to lower their prices so that they can increase their margins as they're selling it to the consumer. So they're at an automatic advantage when they're such a big company because they've got a lot of leverage or power to bargain with their suppliers. However, there are some suppliers, of course, who have that power to sort of say no and say, well, take it or leave it. You either, if I'm Coca-Cola, for example, it's such a well-known brand that they have a little bit of power to offer, not prices that are slightly higher than, say, Pepsi, or slightly higher than any other soft drink manufacturer because of the power of their brand. So again, that's economies of scale. And let's talk about this figure here, which shows us that when you're competing on price, so for example, you're a small niche competitor or a small company, and the only way you can differentiate yourself is to lower your price. What happens is, yes, you're gaining market share, and more people are buying your product because your price is lower, but your profit margin is also going down, as seen by this red line here. Right? So this is sort of explains this concept of when you're chasing after market share and trying to increase your market share, the automatic reaction, or not reaction, but the move to try to capture market share is to lower your price. For small companies, that could be disastrous because your profits are also going down. But for big manufacturers and big companies like Kohl's and Woolworths, Kmart, and all these big companies, Walmart in the United States, for example, they offer a whole lot of products. Their market is very broad. And as they capture market share, the more of the products they can sell, and the more power they have to bargain with their suppliers and gain a bigger margin. So that's why, in this case, the green line, you can see that their profit margins are actually increasing as they're increasing their market share. So again, you are at a big disadvantage if you're a small company. And I want you to sort of remember that thought and the importance of economies of scale. When you're thinking about your assignment, and you're thinking about the company that I will be assigning you, and think about whether they can compete and create economies of scale, especially when they're a new player and you're coming into the industry for the first time. You really don't have economies of scale. So how can you compete? You cannot compete by lowering your price because your margins will disappear. And you're just going to lose a lot of money. So that's worth thinking about. Okay, so successful competitors achieve their competitive advantage by addressing 7 questions effectively. So the first is, are we supplying the right things? Do we have the right product for our market? Are we supplying it in the most effective way? Are we arriving at the lowest possible economic cost? In other words, can we make this product lower than our competitors in terms of the cost? Are we as good or better than our strongest competitor? In many respects, right? We're not just talking about the product, but also the way we manage our business, the way we manage our people. Are we targeting and serving the widest possible market? Because if we are targeting a small market, we may be able to gain some advantage there, but it's limited. And if you are targeting a niche market, your profit will be limited to that market. And so one approach again is to broaden your market if you can. And 6th is, do you have a unique selling proposition? So this is very similar to the value proposition we were talking about some time ago. Unique selling proposition is you can sell something and claim that you're the only product or company that has this feature because it's unique, and therefore your customer will choose you versus your competitor. And seventh is, are we innovating to make sure the answer to all these questions will remain yes, now and into the future? So in other words, even if you have a unique selling proposition now, it doesn't mean that that will be unique next year or the year after that. So you have to keep innovating. Just the same as Apple, its innovations have become, they were earth-shattering some years ago. Like for example, Siri, you can talk to your phone, your phone, you can actually command your phone to do certain things using your voice. They are an advantage there, but with Google coming in and using its own voice recognition software, you can see that they're catching up. So eventually you'll have that unique selling proposition will be no longer unique. So they have to think of something new. And Apple has been very successful in doing that. They're innovating, very constantly, but they're coming to the point where their competitors are basically have caught up, and in many cases have actually surpassed them. So they have to think of something new, not just a new smartphone, but a new product in perhaps a new industry. Okay, at this point, we'll talk about Michael Porter again. I remember Michael Porter, we talked about his 5 forces model for analyzing the industry, but he also came up with his what he calls the generic strategies. These are the strategies that many companies use to try to gain competitive advantage. So we'll watch this video now. So I'm not going to play it here on this video. I want you to sort of go into Moodle and play the video on your own and watch it, okay? And then after that, we'll have a little bit of a discussion. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that video. And just as a summary, what Michael Porter is really saying is that there are two very basic approaches. Okay, so one is to focus on cost, or lowering your cost as much as possible. And secondly, it will be to try to differentiate yourself, right? And then you can also look at your target market to see whether you're looking at a broad market, or if you need to focus on a smaller market, which is a narrow focus. So again, a combination of that will result in these 4 generic strategies. To simplify it, you can even just simplify it down to 2, which is either you differentiate or you try to lower your cost. Lowering your cost, as I said before, that can be done very easily by big companies, but not so easily by small companies. Previous discussion that economies of scale is difficult to achieve if you're a small company. So let's go on. So when you choose differentiation, whether you're differentiating yourself for your broad market or for a narrow market, these are some of the features you can look at to try to become different. So you can look at superior design or performance, the quality of your material, whether it's durable or not, the higher quality in general of your product. A while ago, it was more like the quality of materials, the raw materials you use. So this one is more high quality in terms of your resulting product. Your packaging might be better. Your delivery might be quicker or cheaper. Or it could be a very good customer service, customer response to your response to customers' queries, etc. Or maybe your paperwork's very efficient. Okay, so your processes are quite efficient. So any of these features can help you differentiate your product. So the differentiation strategy can be easily misjudged, however, for a number of reasons. So in other words, it doesn't mean that if you're differentiated that you will always succeed. If you differentiate yourself, but your buyers don't realize that you're different, maybe it's something inside your product that people can't really see. They can't really recognize what's different. It looks the same. Or maybe the difference that you chose to come up with, isn't really that valuable to your customers, then you're not going to be successful. On many cases, you might be overfilling a need. So an example of this is if you're trying to improve your customer service, but it turns out that to deliver really good customer service, you might be spending so much more money, and therefore, your costs will increase. It's a perfect example might be, or a simple example might be a restaurant. You want to improve customer service, so therefore you hire a lot of waiters, to deliver that good customer service. Yes, the customer doesn't wait that long because he can call a waiter right away. He can be seen, but that's going to be expensive, especially here in Australia where wages are quite high. And so it's a really delicate balance that you have to strike between delivering customer service and hiring people and trying to be cost efficient at the same time. Or maybe the different thing that you selected is something that the competitors can easily improve on or copy, or even copy and then price themselves even lower. That is a problem. Or maybe you're different, but then you price yourself very highly. Then it might be too much of a price for your market to buy. Fairly recently, I had a screen that was I had that installed. It's like an insect screen so that the flies don't come into the house, and it's for a large room. And it was very expensive for me because it's such a nice product, right? It's a retractable screen, so when you pull the screen, basically goes across the entrance, and when you want to open it, then you can simply pull it in, and it disappears into this pillar. So it's a very good product, but it's very expensive. I can imagine that because of the price, it's $2,000 for that screen, when probably a similar screen it's not as nice, but might cost you maybe $300. So it's a huge difference. And although it is very nice and very different, I'm sure a lot of people won't be willing to pay that price because of that huge price difference. Some examples also might be if you think too narrowly, if you miss opportunities, or maybe you're outflanked by your competitors, or they come up with something new. If you come up with something, a new feature for your product, but they've come out with something even better, or maybe perhaps they beat you to it. You have the same product, but they launched theirs a lot sooner. That would be an example of, again, even if you're different, you could fail. Okay, this slide just illustrates that depending on whether you're focusing on low cost or if you're going after differentiation, your strategy, your functional strategy throughout the organization might change, or will change actually, depending on your overall strategy. And I won't go into all of these, but just have a look here. For example, your marketing strategy, and if will be different if your corporate strategy or your higher level strategy is low cost versus differentiation. So for a low cost strategy, large companies will try to obtain media discounts. So in other words, if you're advertising, you're going, because of the level of the amount of advertising you're doing, you can probably demand a lower price from your supplier. That is an example of low cost marketing. But if you're looking after differentiation, and that's your main strategy, the marketing will be focused on image, trying to reinforce the image of the company as something that's different, that's better than its competitors. For operations, if you're a low-cost strategy, then you're focusing on your plant or your factory and trying to make that as efficient as possible. So you're looking at your processes and trying to see whether you can omit or reduce these processes and hopefully reduce your costs. But if you're after differentiation, then it's about quality. So you're willing to pay more to make sure that the product quality is better. So as the video showed you earlier, it's really very difficult to have a low cost and a differentiation strategy. Oftentimes you need to choose which one you're going to go through. Now, sometimes that you could have an opportunity to do both, but it's quite rare. So let's in fact look at this video together. Again, pause this video and watch this one, which is about IKEA, and it's again found in Moodle in the 3.1 folder. And after you watched it, try to ask yourself, are they after differentiation or are they after low cost? Okay, so, or are they could be after both. Try to determine that and give evidence during your discussion. Give evidence to me as to why you think they're after low cost or why you think they're after differentiation. Okay, we're back. I hope you had a successful discussion or a reflection of basically what you think IKEA has in terms of its strategy. Let's go on. And this figure here just tells us, or tries to answer that question, how do you gain sustainable competitive advantage? What do you really mean by that, sustainable competitive advantage? I guess what that means is that if you've got an advantage and you can carry that through the years and use that, and your competitors aren't able to copy that advantage, then that is what we call sustainable. But a lot of experts say that there is really no such thing as a sustainable competitive advantage, because after a while, you look at many industries, eventually your competition will catch up, or some other competitor will come in, or a substitute perhaps will come in and offer something of better value, or perhaps will do something better than what you're doing. So, but I guess what this slide is showing us is there are certain sources or origins of competitive advantage that is actually better than other origins. So if you focus simply on technology, then your product might be better than your competitor. A great example, again, let's go back to that. I use this example quite a lot, the smartphone industry, because we all have smartphones. So I think you guys can relate to it. When Apple first came up with its large format touchscreen smartphone, you can argue that that's a technological advantage. But the thing about that is patents can be overcome. So in other words, people can go around patents somehow, or companies can go around patents somehow. Some companies simply copy the product and you can't stop them. Or even if you sue them, they don't care, they'll do it anyway. Example would be Samsung. Apple had sued Samsung and succeeded. Actually, Samsung had to pay Apple because of some patents that were infringed. They were copying the technology of Apple. So, but think about, again, the product is the sustainability of your product, even if it is better, that's just a couple of years. But what you could do is focus on manufacturing, have techniques and systems which involve learning and experience. The more experience you have, the more efficient your manufacturing becomes. And you can argue that that's a longer term competitive advantage, because you can use those skills into other products that you're making. But organizational processes can even be longer and become more sustainable, because it's more difficult to copy. Organizational process is something that happens within the company, your culture, for example, and your competitors don't see that. They don't really, unless they have a spy, they don't really see what you're doing in your company. And maybe your distribution networks, although they're visible, they can be negotiated very well, and you can gain that advantage. And as you can see here, that's a more sustainable origin of competitive advantage. But the longest lasting competitive advantage are the advantage you get from people. So how good are your people? How talented are they? How well do they work together? That can be a very sustainable advantage, because again, it's more difficult to train people. It's more difficult to pirate people. And that little chemistry and how you lead them really can be more protected and can be more sustainable. And again, Apple is an example of this, because they've constantly hired the best in the business, the best technology people, the best software engineers, etc. There's a lot of cachet in working for Apple. In other words, people want to work for Apple because it's such a prestigious company. So they're able to protect that sustainable advantage because of their not just their processes, but the people behind these processes, their design, for example. But even that, they say, may not necessarily be sustainable. Eventually, people can be able to train or hire people with the same amount of skill, and they can create these cultures within the company. Samsung is very successful in this. They're able to hire a lot of, again, experts from all over the world, and they've been very successful in innovating. So again, hard to say. It's one of those things that we can argue whether that's really sustainable or not. Okay, probably our second to the last slide. And we'll go back. I mean, we basically had discussed the blue ocean strategy before, and our example was basically Cirque du Soleil. I'm going to give you more examples about blue ocean strategy, but the basic approach of blue ocean strategy is what we call the ERRC grid. So in other words, we focus on eliminating certain factors that the industry has long competed on, yet we can eliminate that, hopefully, instead of copy it. Okay, so an example of this is animals in the circus, as we were saying earlier. We can eliminate that and actually save money if we eliminate that. So what factors can we reduce, or which factors should be reduced well below the industry standard, and hopefully save up on cost if we reduce that. But then if pick out the which factor there that you can raise well above the industry standard. So an example of this would be the quality of the acrobatic performances of Cirque du Soleil, and the other features that they're offering, which they have in fact created. Okay, and this is like the storytelling that they're doing, the thematic approach. This has never been done in other circuses, so that this is something that they have created. At this point, you should go and turn to, again, to Moodle to watch the video on Blue Ocean strategy. This basically defines what the approaches are, and again, the ERRC. But then here's another example aside from Cirque du Soleil. This time it is the Citizen M Hotels example. So I want you to sort of watch both videos, and in the Citizen M video, try to figure out what factor did Citizen M eliminate? What factor did they reduce? What factor did they raise well above the standard? And what factor did they create? Something new, right? So you can see from that video, and try to take notes and try to write down as you're watching the video. Again, what is the factors that they eliminated? What's the factors that they reduced, raised, and created? And then we'll come back and discuss that. I just wanted to stress that this is going to be part of your quiz tomorrow, 3.2. And the quiz will be asking you the same questions I'm asking you. So it makes a lot of sense for you to make that discussion now. So you'll be prepared for the quiz tomorrow.